The music echoed through the valley, a ghostly whisper carried by the cold night wind. It was distant yet close, fading yet persistent, a melody from nowhere and everywhere at once. The sky was painted in deep shades of orange as mystery ink drove down a deserted road, surrounded by nothing but empty fields and silence, but then a glow on the horizon. Flickering lights in shades of red, blue, and gold. It was impossible. Fred eased off the gas pedal, his eyes narrowing as the shapes ahead became clearer. Is that a carnival? Daphne leaned forward, her face illuminated by the colorful glow. But there's nothing on the map. This place doesn't exist. Velma adjusted her glasses and tapped the GPS. No registered landmark, no listed structure. It's as if this place just appeared. And yet, there it was. A massive carnival stretched before them, fully lit, fully operational. At its entrance, a grand golden arch swayed slightly in the wind, its worn-out sign reading, "Welcome to Maximillian's Grand Carnival." But something was very, very wrong. The carnival was alive. The carousel spun slowly, its painted horses bobbing up and down in a hypnotic rhythm. The Ferris wheel turned steadily, its empty seats swaying. The haunted house cards slid along their tracks, vanishing into the darkness of the tunnel. But there were no people, no crowds, no lively chatter, no laughter filling the air. The carnival was running completely empty. Fred stopped the van, scanning the eerily silent amusement park. This doesn't make sense. Velma ran her fingers over the counter of a ticket booth. It's pristine, no dust, no rust. It looks like it opened this morning. Daphne wrapped her arms around herself. Then where is everyone? Who turned on the lights? Who's running the rides? Shaggy and Scooby, too distracted by the scent of fresh popcorn, wandered over to a small red and white striped stand. The smell was mouth-watering, steam still rising from a popcorn cart. "Looks like someone just left this here," Shaggy murmured, grabbing a handful. But the second his fingers touched the kernels, they crumbled into dust. Scooby stepped back, ears pinned, sniffing the air cautiously. The popcorn was gone, but the scent lingered. Meanwhile, Velma carefully inspected the fairground when something caught her eye, a small piece of paper near the carousel. She bent down, picked it up, and turned it over in her hands. It was a carousel ticket, but something was deeply unsettling. The paper wasn't aged, wasn't crumpled, the ink was still fresh. As she adjusted her glasses, she froze. The date on the ticket read 1923. Her stomach dropped. A carnival supposedly abandoned for decades, yet this ticket looked like it had just been printed. "Fred," Velma's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't think this is just any carnival." Fred didn't respond immediately. His eyes were locked on the Ferris wheel. It was speeding up. Daphne stepped away from the Hall of Mirrors, her face pale. I saw something in there, a reflection that wasn't mine." A gust of wind howled through the fairgrounds, and for the first time, a sound. Laughter, distant, faint, but unmistakable. Then, the entire carnival flickered. Every light blazed at once, then dimmed, then flickered again. The speakers crackled to life, emitting a sharp burst of static before a voice echoed through the air. "Ladies and gentlemen, the show is about to begin." The voice rang through the empty carnival. There was no audience, no performers, just silence. The carousel music grew louder. The Ferris wheel spun even faster. The neon signs flickered erratically. And then the curtains of a grand stage began to rise in the middle of the fairground. Spotlights beamed down. The loudspeaker crackled again. But who was performing? The curtains rose slowly, revealing an empty stage bathed in golden light. The wooden floor creaked under an unseen weight, as if someone or something was already standing there. But there was no one, no performer, no audience. Just the carnival itself, watching. Fred clenched his fists. "Okay, I don't like this." Daphne crossed her arms, shifting uneasily. We need to figure out where everyone went. Velma adjusted her glasses, her sharp eyes scanning every detail. Something isn't right. This place looks too perfect to have been abandoned for decades. The gang split up, cautiously exploring the fairgrounds. Velma wandered toward a ticket booth, its glass polished, its registers untouched. Behind the counter, neatly arranged ledgers rested under a thick sheet of glass. The papers inside looked pristine, their ink crisp and fresh. She flipped open one of the books and her breath hitched. The last recorded date, October 16th, 1923. Yet the ink looked like it had been written yesterday. Her fingers ran down the pages, her mind racing. Everything about this carnival screamed 1920s. The decor, the music, the styling. But if it had been closed for decades, why was it still running? She turned another page and froze. A name was written repeatedly in the logs, circled over and over in looping, elegant handwriting. Maximillian the Magnificent. Her stomach twisted. She had heard the name before. A legendary magician who vanished the same night this carnival shut down. Meanwhile, Daphne wandered into the Hall of Mirrors, its glass walls curving in unnatural ways. She moved cautiously between the reflections, watching as her own image stretched and twisted. But something was off. One of the mirrors wasn't reflecting her at all. She stepped closer, staring into the smooth, unbroken glass. Then a flicker. A figure appeared. It was her, but dressed in a flowing antique gown from the 1920s, her expression eerily calm. Daphne's breath hitched. What? Then, her reflection moved before she did. Shaggy and Scooby wandered into the funhouse, hoping to avoid anything too spooky. Like, if this place is haunted, I'd rather not be on the VIP list, Shaggy muttered. But as they stepped inside, the hallway shifted. The walls elongated. The exit door vanished. "Raro," Scooby whimpered. The floor tilted under their feet, sending them sliding down a spiraling tunnel. They crashed through a set of swinging doors and stumbled into a massive, dimly lit room filled with mannequins dressed as carnival performers. Shaggy swallowed hard. I don't remember signing up for a backstage tour. Then one of the mannequins turned its head. Scooby yelped and jumped into Shaggy's arms, just as the entire room came to life. Puppets moved, mechanical clowns twisted their heads, and unseen laughter rippled through the air. The funhouse was watching them. Daphne stood at the center of the carnival, trying to figure out why the rides were still running. The carousel spun, its painted horses grinning under flickering lights. The Ferris wheel turned slowly, creaking under the wind. But there was no operator. Then, his eyes locked onto something at the far end of the fairgrounds, a massive mural. He walked toward it, heart pounding. It was a collage of old photos, showcasing the carnival's best performances from different eras. Alt text. Jugglers, acrobats, magicians. Fred squinted at the faded images, his fingers trailing over the black and white photographs. Then he saw something that made his blood run cold. A photograph of the Mystery Inc. gang, smiling, dressed in 1920s carnival attire, as if they had always been part of the show. Fred took a step back. His breath quickened. That was impossible. Before Fred could call the others, the speakers crackled to life once again. That same deep, theatrical voice echoed through the empty carnival. "Ladies and gentlemen, the main event is about to begin." A spotlight snapped on, illuminating the carousel. The painted horses twitched. The Ferris wheel groaned. The carnival was waking up, and this time it wasn't letting them leave. The air thickened, charged with something unseen. The distant echoes of laughter drifted through the fairgrounds, yet the place remained empty. No audience, no performers. Just shadows stretching across the ground where no one stood. Fred's pulse pounded as he stared at the mural of old carnival photos. Among the faded faces and sepia tones, he saw something impossible. A photograph of Mystery Inc., dressed in 1920s carnival costumes. Smiling, Fred took a step back, his breath shallow. How could they be in a photo from a century ago? Before he could call the others, the carnival lights flared, washing the entire fairground in a golden glow. The speakers crackled to life once more. Ladies and gentlemen, our main event has arrived. The carousel lurched forward, spinning faster. The Ferris wheel groaned, empty seats swaying as if unseen riders had taken their places. Then spotlights snapped on, one on Fred, one on Velma, another on Daphne, then Shaggy and Scooby. A slow, rhythmic clapping echoed through the fairgrounds, yet there was no audience. The stage curtains rose, revealing a tall figure in a burgundy coat with golden embroidery. His top hat sat atop slick-back silver hair. His pale face twisted into a wide grin, dark eyes gleaming under the lights. He removed his hat and bowed. "Welcome to the greatest show of your lives." Before anyone could move, a force yanked them forward. Fred's hand slammed onto something hard and wooden. He looked down. His clothes had changed. Gone was his sweater. Instead, he wore a red tailcoat, white gloves, and a black body. Daphne gasped, catching her reflection in a mirror. Her purple dress had vanished, replaced by a glittering 1920s showgirl outfit. Velma's sweater was gone, replaced by a magician's vest and cloak. Shaggy clutched his arms, eyes wide. An oversized clown suit had replaced his green shirt. Scooby let out a horrified whimper, a ruffled circus collar around his neck. They weren't themselves anymore. They were part of the show. Fred tried to pull off the coat, but it wouldn't budge. His body moved against his will, stepping forward like a true ringmaster. A drumroll thundered from nowhere. Daphne staggered as the carousel jerked violently, pulling her onto a painted horse. The reins locked around her wrists. Shaggy and Scooby tumbled backward into the clown tent, only to be shoved onto a tightrope high above the fairgrounds. Velma tried to run, but a magician's box appeared around her. The top slammed shut. The crowd roared. But there was no crowd, only the carnival itself, clapping. The man in the burgundy coat, Maximillian, grinned as he watched them struggle. Ah, now this is how it should be. Fred fought against the carnival's pull. "Who are you?" Maximillian tapped his cane on the wooden stage. "I am the master of the greatest show on earth." Velma pounded against the magician's box. "You trapped the workers here, didn't you?" Maximillian chuckled. "Oh, my dear, they never left." Daphne's breath hitched. "What do you mean?" Maximillian gestured with a flourish. "The carousel, the mirrors, the laughing mannequins, the empty Ferris wheel seats." His smile widened. "They are the performers." The gang's blood ran cold. Velma's mind reeled. The reflections in the hall of mirrors that moved on their own. The funhouse mannequins that turned their heads. They weren't props. They were trapped souls. Maximillian lifted his arms. "And now, dear guests, it's your turn." The carnival lights blazed, the music swelled, and the show began again. The lights flared, illuminating the carnival in an eerie golden glow. The music surged, its melody warping into something unnatural. The show had begun, and Mystery Inc. was trapped in its spotlight. Fred stood at the center of the fairgrounds, his hands gripping a ringmaster's cane he had never picked up. His body moved against his will, stepping forward like a performer about to announce the night's grand act. From inside the magician's box, Velma struggled against invisible restraints. The locks clicked tight, refusing to budge. Daphne gasped as the carousel spun faster, the painted horses whinnying as if they were alive. She pulled at the reins around her wrists, but they wouldn't loosen. Shaggy and Scooby teetered on a tightrope high above the fairgrounds, their oversized clown shoes making balance impossible. Below them, A shadowy crowd of faceless figures clapped in slow, rhythmic applause. They had become part of the act. The showman watched from the stage, his golden cane tapping in amusement. His voice echoed through the fairgrounds, smooth and theatrical. Ah, how marvelous. The performance flows so naturally. It's as if you were always meant to be here. Fred gritted his teeth, fighting the unseen force controlling his movements. Let us go. Maximillian tilted his head. But why would you want to leave? You're home now. Daphne wrenched at the reins, her voice sharp. You trapped these people here. You turned them into the carnival. Maximillian gave a slow, knowing smile. Oh, no, my dear. They chose to stay. They were forgotten, just like this carnival. And rather than fade into nothing, they became part of something eternal. Velma's eyes narrowed behind her glasses. You're lying. Maximillian sighed. Am I? Then tell me, dear detective, what happens when a place is abandoned? What as people are erased from memory? They don't disappear. They fade into the story. He gestured toward the silent, watching shadows. The forgotten always have a place here. Fred forced his head to turn, scanning the carnival. There had to be a way out, a flaw in the act. Velma's voice broke through the chaos. It's a loop. Fred snapped his attention to her. What? Velma's mind raced. The performers keep playing their parts because they're trapped in the act. If we break the show, we break the loop. Fred's grip tightened on the cane. Then we end this performance. Maximilian's grin flickered, his gaze darkening. A magician never appreciates an audience that refuses to play along. He raised his cane and the carnival roared to life. The carousel spun faster, its horses baring their teeth. Daphne yelped as the wooden figures snapped at her ankles. The tightrope twisted, forcing Shaggy and Scooby into a tumbling freefall. Velma's magician's box vanished into thin air, then reappeared over the Ferris wheel, dangling precariously. The crowd of shadows began to close in, their featureless faces stretching into silent screams. Fred's body lurched forward, compelled by the act's final cue. But this time, he resisted. Now, he shouted. Daphne ripped her wrists free, the carousel's music screeching as the ride sputtered to a halt. Shaggy and Scooby grabbed onto a banner midair, sending them swinging toward the main stage. Velma, still trapped, kicked open a hidden door in the magician's box, tumbling onto the Ferris wheel platform. Fred lifted the cane, his voice booming through the fairgrounds. The show is over! The reaction was instant. The carnival trembled. The lights flickered erratically. The audience of shadows vanished in a wave of mist. Maximillian staggered backward, his form glitching, his face contorted in rage. No, the performance must continue. But the carnival was coming undone. The carousel cracked apart. The big top tent deflated, fabric sinking into the ground like quicksand. The Ferris wheel spun out of control, its structure crumbling. Maximillian reached out toward the collapsing fairgrounds, desperate. His voice lost its theatrical charm now. It was pleading. Wait, you don't understand. If the show ends, so do I. Fred hesitated. For a moment, he saw something beneath the grin fear. Maximillian wasn't just the ringmaster. He was the carnival itself. Velma's voice cut through the chaos. We have to leave now. Fred let the cane fall from his hands. The final spotlight snapped off, and the entire carnival went dark. The silence was deafening. One moment, the carnival had been alive, blazing with unnatural energy. Now, it was nothing but darkness and dust. The Ferris wheel stood still, its lights flickering weakly before fading. The carousel was frozen mid-motion, its painted horses cracked and lifeless. The tents had collapsed into heaps of rotting fabric. Fred, Velma, Daphne, Shaggy, and Scooby stood at the center of the fairgrounds, breathing heavily. And in front of them, Maximillian lay crumpled on the stage. His once pristine burgundy coat was now faded, tattered at the edges. His golden embroidery had dulled. Even his cane, once polished and gleaming, had lost its luster. The showman groaned, his voice weak. No, the performance must continue. But there was no more show. The carnival had died with it. Velma stepped forward cautiously, adjusting her glasses. This carnival, it wasn't just haunted. It was alive. Maximilian's dark eyes flickered open, exhaustion clear in his expression. Of course, it was all I had left. Daphne crossed her arms. You weren't trying to scare us. You were trying to keep the show going, weren't you? Maximilian exhaled shakily, pushing himself into a seated position. His smirk was gone. The world forgot about us, he murmured. The performers, the magic, the laughter. The moment the world moved on, we ceased to exist. His gaze drifted over the ruins of the fairgrounds. And I couldn't let it end, so I made a deal. Shaggy swallowed hard. Like a real ghost deal? Maximilian chuckled, though there was no humor in it. Not a ghost, boy. Time. I struck a bargain to keep the carnival running forever. Fred's jaw tightened. But at what cost? Maximilian's face darkened. The carnival needed performers. Velma's stomach turned. That's why people disappeared. Maximilian nodded slowly. They became part of the story. The ones who stayed, they became the attractions. Daphne's voice was barely a whisper. And you? Maximilian looked down at his own hands, watching as his once elegant gloves began to fray. I became the ringmaster. As long as the show ran, I remained. But now, his fingers trembled, fading at the edges. Fred's eyes widened. The carnival is gone. So you? Maximilian smiled sadly. The curtain falls for us all eventually, dear boy. The wind howled through the empty fairgrounds. Maximilian exhaled deeply and stood up one last time. He turned to face the gang, bowing low, just as he had countless times before. Then, he straightened his coat, adjusted his hat, and took a step back. His form flickered, his edges blurring into mist. And then he was gone. The last trace of Maximilian the Magnificent vanished with the wind. Velma's voice was quiet. It's over. Fred nodded, though his expression was grim. Yeah, but I don't think this was ever just a ghost story. Daphne rubbed her arms. If no one remembers something, does it really disappear? Shaggy shuddered. Like, let's not stick around to find out. Scooby whimpered in agreement. Agreed. The gang turned toward the exit. And as they walked away, leaving the remains of Maximilian's forgotten dream behind, the Ferris wheel let out one final creak. The gang walked through the deserted fairgrounds in silence. The air was thick, heavy with something unspoken, as if the carnival itself had left behind an echo of its presence. The lights were out, the laughter gone. What had once been a mesmerizing, otherworldly spectacle was now nothing but ruins. A skeletal frame of rusted metal, tattered tents, and a Ferris wheel that no longer turned, and Maximilian vanished. Fred stopped near the rusted iron gates, looking back over his shoulder. The carnival had felt alive, like it had been waiting for them. Now, it was nothing but a memory. Think anyone will believe this place ever existed? Velma adjusted her glasses, her gaze unreadable. That's the thing, Fred. I'm not sure it ever really did. Daphne crossed her arms. Maximilian said the world forgot about the carnival, and that's why it started fading. But what if that's true for everything? Shaggy hesitated. Like, you're saying if no one remembers something, it just disappears? Velma nodded. Ideas, places, people. If no one tells their story, it's like they were never there. Fred let out a slow breath. That's why Maximilian did all this. He wasn't just keeping the carnival alive. He was keeping himself from fading away. A man who refused to be forgotten. A magician who had turned illusion into reality until even he couldn't hold on to it anymore. Daphne glanced at the empty fairgrounds. But if that's true, how did we get here? Fred turned to her. What do you mean? Daphne hugged herself against the cold air. If no one remembered Maximilian's Carnival, then how did we find it? How did we even know to come here? No one had an answer. A chilling breeze swept through the empty fairgrounds, rattling the collapsed tents. A rusted ticket booth creaked as the wind passed through its hollow frame. Scooby's ears perked up, his nose twitching. Ruh-roh. The gang turned toward the Ferris wheel. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a single light flickered at the very top. A faint glow, a dying ember. The gang froze. Velma's pulse quickened. That's not possible. There's no power here anymore. Fred took a slow step back. Maybe. The show's not over after all. The neon sign at the entrance buzzed, its golden letters flickering weakly. Maximilian's Grand Carnival. A whisper of distant applause floated through the air. Soft, faint, like the remnants of an audience long gone. The wind picked up, sending a ripple through the torn banners. Then the light at the top of the Ferris wheel went out. For good. Shaggy gulped. Can we, go now? Scooby nodded furiously. Agreed. The gang hurried to the mystery machine. Fred didn't look back this time. Neither did Daphne. Velma, however, hesitated at the van's door. She reached into her pocket, fingers brushing against something small and smooth. She pulled it out. A carousel ticket. Aged, yellowed, yet perfectly intact. 1923. She didn't remember picking it up. And that was the part that scared her most. With a deep breath, she climbed into the van, pushing the thought aside. The mystery machine's engine rumbled to life, its headlights cutting through the dense fog that had begun to roll in. As they drove away, the carnival remained silent. No more lights, no more laughter. Nothing left but the shadows of something that once was. But somewhere, buried deep in the cold night air, the echo of a distant calliope tune played one last time. A quiet reminder. A final curtain call, and then silence.